principal technical program manager in our Cape team. If for those of you that don't know the Cape team or haven't worked with us before, we are a customer-facing and customer-focused team that sits within engineering. So half of my time is spent with customers, and then half of my time is spent with the engineering groups, kind of talking through product feature prioritization, any kind of scenarios that we're missing, and then helping them kind of prioritize different functionality depending on what our customers are asking for. So last year and the year, kind of the last 18 months, I've been focused quite a bit around working with our engineering teams and our service side teams on improving our service reliability and our survivability story. So it's been really great, interesting work, and I feel like we've made some really good progressions. Specifically in our announcement for 5.9s, and then also we had some gaps, right, where we were talking kind of survivability and survivable branch appliances, and there just wasn't enough functionality there to make that valuable. So we kind of went on a world tour. We spoke to customers all over the place, all over the globe, in any industry, mining, healthcare, you name it, and we've kind of brought out new functionality that we're hoping kind of gets us closer to the mark. We're really not done. But hopefully we're kind of getting to a point where we're a little closer, and hopefully kind of being able to really kind of deliver on those final pieces to make it a fully fledged survivable solution. So I have a tendency to talk a lot, and I talk with my hands a lot. So that's me. Please throw anything you have in chat, and I'll try to kind of accommodate and answer questions as we go along. I really like to have a conversation, right? So there's a lot of slides here. I'm going to kind of talk through them, but please feel free to throw in the chat, and we can take it from there. I figured I would start a little bit on cloud service reliability, right, in our cloud all up. Because when we talk about service reliability and 5.9s, what's really important to understand is we've got our core principles, right, that live within how we build our cloud service all up. And then we've also got the service reliability at, the microservice layer or the product layers. So let's start with the service reliability pieces. So a couple things here. We have a bunch of principles that we really look to architect all of our solutions on top of, right? And to make sure that all of these principles we're following with every single product. So a lot of them are designing for resiliency all up, right? So it needs to be resiliency and reliability by design. There is also when there is a fault, right? How can we isolate that fault to not impact the entire service? So that's what you'll see where we kind of go through really stringent when we're architecting things. We're building microservices at each layer. And the reason we build out microservices is so that we can actually be a bit more resilient And at a fault level, we can actually isolate and prevent, a single, let's say, a chat service issue from impacting everything related to teams, right? One of those big pieces are safe change management. One thing to note here is that these principles are actually executed at the service layer, right? So for instance, when we want to roll out a change, we might not have within engineering, teams engineering, control on, how long we're going to make a certain gate or a quality gap, or if we can bypass something. So a lot of this safe change management is built in at the service layer so that we're guaranteeing that management and that deployment that deployment discipline, right? That we're making sure that we hit quality gates, right? The typical thing is what you'll see is when we go to GA, we go 20, 40, 60, 80%, right? Um, uh, and that's because if we hit 20% and we find an issue, we need to be able to go back, right? The other piece is gates that are quality generated. So we've got all of these testing matrices that will test everything. And then they will either, if we pass testing, we can roll to the next ring. So a lot of you are probably familiar with our ring kind of, ring 0, and as we ring our ring functionality out. So on top then of those basic principles, we also deploy protection mechanisms. So that's going to be things like, replication, monitoring, automated alerting. One of the things that you'll see is we're actually within our proprietary networking within Azure, we're actually going really big and big bets with AI, helping us to actually improve certain things and helping us monitor different things. You'll also see we do automated alerting, but one thing to note is this is constant improvement state, right? We don't ever feel like we get to a point where we go, okay, we're perfect now. We're not going to work on reliability or resiliency anymore, right? This is ongoing work. And then I'll talk a little bit more about failure isolation when we get to teams. And then also fault injection. This is when we're actually stress testing our systems, right? So we are injecting faults and making sure that the monitoring and the alerting are working correctly. We're also then leveraging learnings from different outages or failures, and we build that into self-healing processes. So this is kind of the entire Microsoft all-up cloud resiliency vision. Again, are we perfect? No, we're not. But like I said, it's something that is constant. It is constant improvement. So I'm going to kind of pivot now to how Teams actually leverages some of those cloud reliability principles, but then also how we build specifically for teams in certain of those areas. We'd like to think that phone is we're building the reliable calling aspect, and we're taking into account every piece of that life cycle. So end-to-end reliability, but then we're also tacking on our SLAs. In the event of service outage or internet outages, that we're also providing our SBC partners with the right set of capabilities to allow for branch appliance or local survivability. So this is kind of this is how we look at layers, right? So think of this as this is the actual physical and logical breakout of our services, where we can actually start to be a bit more fault, where we can isolate faults. So think about it as we've got our data centers, and we've got our resiliency built in at every level for our data centers, regional, global, even zonal, right? All of that failure is built, failure resiliency is built in. Our network is, and you'll actually see this, there's a lot of customers that also always kind of go, hey, we can't see what, if we do a ICMP, we don't get response from inside Microsoft service. Yeah, that's for a very good reason, right? We have very proprietary networking models that our Azure networking team has in place. We call these like regional gateways, and they're hyperscale. And these are what allow us to actively do, failover and have, and actually move away from a single point of failure, right? On top of the network, then we've got our service layer, right? So we've got our M365 and dependent services. And as you know, Teams kind of leverages a lot of the dependent services. Like most of our other products, we rely on Active Directory for sign-in. We obviously rely on our networking solutions and our hyperscale network. Within Teams specifically, we have our dependencies on Active Directory, but we also take some dependencies on SharePoint, right? And some OneDrive. And that's just because certain functionality of Teams was really meant to bring a canvas of. The one thing that Teams changed for me was I wasn't in Outlook, and I wasn't in my SharePoint anymore, and I wasn't in OneDrive in all these different windows. But to that point, certain functionality is then built, is reliant on some of those other outside services. So, that can impact some of the functionality.
Hey, Nolene, I had a question that come in here, and I want to make sure that you maybe talk about this because I think it's kind of important in this conversation. So Denise was asking about for survivability, is this assuming you are talking about calling plans, operator direct, and not direct routing? I mean, when we're talking about survivability as a whole, the first part of this, right? So can you kind of give a little bit of background specifically in what flavors we're talking about? Is it all? Sure. Is it part of it? Right? Give a little bit of background there.
Yeah. So when I'm talking about the service reliability, I'm speaking to more across the board, right? I'm speaking to this is calling plans, it's direct routing, it's all of those PSTN connectivity models. When we get into local survivability applies to direct routing only, right? Because it is actually leveraging, it's part of the SBC. So it's code we actually give our SBC partners to allow them to leverage SBC in survivability in terms of if you lost connectivity to the service all up. Does it make sense? It's the piece that we do for voice survivability, where customers are leveraging, excuse me, it's been one of those weeks, direct routing, sorry. You'll probably also see it in some direct routing as a service. Partners also kind of leverage that SBA in certain architectures. Does that help?
I think so, Denise. I think that hopefully answered your question.
Yep.
Thanks, Nolene.
Yeah, no worries. This slide, I'm not going to speak to. right? This is a very detailed slide that really kind of talks about how we fail over, how we do everything, how we limit incident impact. This is a reference slide for, it lives in our survivability and reliability playbook on the Teams Academy site. And it's really just a check in the box slide for you. So you can understand kind of how things are configured and how we're doing failovers. But not to spend too much more time there, where I want to and this is where you'll get a little bit more understanding on what capabilities live in calling plan versus direct routing. Because the way we architect Teams and Teams microservices allows us to do some fault isolation, as well as, graceful degradation if we have a service that goes down. So for Teams, we have over 100 microservices, but they're segmented. So for instance, the way you see that work is here, right? So I focused on the primary collaboration pieces here, but calling service, right? Then we've got the VoIP and the meeting calling service. And then we've got chat services and events, right? So the way to think about this is if you're a customer, and I built this actually in partnership with a customer that was leveraging a bunch of different PSTN connectivity models. So they had some calling plan and they had some direct routing. So for PSTN calling, if we have a loss in the PSTN calling service, the piece about the fault isolation that we can do is that PSTN calling, if it goes down, it doesn't take meeting or chat or events with it necessarily. For instance, it might take PSTN dial-in or dial-out capabilities away from, let's say, a meeting that you have those in. Still do VoIP, you can still do meetings, you can still do point-to-point calling. And likewise, right, where meetings and VoIP calling go down, that doesn't mean that the PSTN service is down. So this is kind of a matrix that I built where you still have certain functionality available, depending on whether you're direct routing or calling plan. I haven't really moved this in beyond kind of the two that we have total control over yet, but this kind of gives you a matrix on the capabilities that you can still have at the service layer, right? But that's about where it stops for calling plan. Some of the investments that we've made has been in AI. We went through a couple of painful years, and one thing to note is we're always learning from our incidents, right? So we started to really kind of look into how do we deliver 5 nines? That reality means that we really have to partner with a bunch of our depending services too. So a lot of that like I said, it's constant, right? So a couple of the things that we invested in to get us to 5 nines and then take us beyond that potentially was things like we wanted to do auto detection and minimize downtime. So for instance, you'll know that there is an issue right now where in order for an SBA to spin up, you've actually got to have a full internet outage, like a full service outage. So what we're actually doing now with the Azure team is we're working on detecting Azure outages, because if you have an Azure outage, you effectively can't get to the rest of the service, right? So we should be able to give you a failover option if you've got direct routing, right? Because that still encompasses an outage. So where we're looking at here is we're looking to make sure that we can detect more service and dependent service outages so that we can also include the failover mechanism to be able to kick in, or at least give customers a way to manually fail over. This also kind of comes in when you have a bouncing internet. So a lot of the work that we're doing now is essentially trying to work with other teams to be able to detect downtime and provide failover in more scenarios than just you've lost access to the entire service. So part of that work was we felt confident that we could now move into being able to kind of do a 5 nines SLA. Because we take the fact that voice is a critical workload, we take it really seriously. So 5 nines, we announced, I think we kind of announced it back in Enterprise Connect timeframe, so earlier this year. Now it covers calling plans, phone system, and audio conferencing. To full transparency here, what is and isn't covered, right? So with the SLA, we can cover Teams calling plans, right? And do 5 nines on Teams calling plans. We can also do it on phone system and audio conferencing. However, a lot of times, if there is a third-party conferencing system in place, or potentially, there is a breakout of services into third parties, we will operate on the assumption that we have an outage, but we will always fall back to if we don't have an outage, it's absolutely possible that there is an internet outage, or we've seen fiber cuts that take out, the Eastern Seaboard, and all of like AT&T or Verizon services. I've had that experience with fiber optics. So there's always those other scenarios that we don't necessarily have control over, that don't necessarily fall into the 5 nines. And that you'll see across the board, right? Our competitors also say 5 nines, but it's generally kind of scoped to the parts of the infrastructure that we can control, and that they can control. So here's kind of our journey, right? So it started a while back, right, where we had calendar 2021. That was around the pandemic timeframe. So we built out network, we built out everything, and we went to 4 nines. We looked at continuous service improvement. CY23 and 24 now is when we're looking at those outage detection scenarios beyond just you can't get to the service, period. And then part of that is we kind of announced our SLA for 5 nines, again, kind of Enterprise Connect timeframe, beginning of this year. So that covers kind of the service reliability pieces. I always feel like I know it's not the same thing, right? Survivability is not the same as reliability, but they go hand in hand, especially when most of our customers are potentially in hybrid scenarios, right? You need to be able to rely on the service for what we have kind of said. Hey, this is our service level commitment to you. But then there's also survivability options, right? So this is where you can see here service availability considerations. Now, this is probably a slide you've seen in many of our playbooks, but it really kind of calls out, hey, this is the capability when you go with calling plans, when you go with Operator Connect, and you go with Teams Phone Mobile, and then direct routing. What I will say is I work with a lot of our S500 customers, and for the most part, our largest customer base is still very heavily using direct routing. And that's mainly because they're coming from, maybe a Skype for Business scenario, or they're coming from, even if there's like Teams, not necessarily Teams, but like Cisco. A lot of our customers, and I particularly see this in healthcare scenarios, right, are still in a hybrid scenario, right? So one of the things that you'll notice is here, here for direct routing, that's where the SBA plays. So that's where SBA is supported, because SBA is really kind of just an app that latches in to the SBC. It's not kind of a separate, necessarily a separate appliance as it was back in the Skype days. Show my age here a little bit, but you had a survivable branch server back in also Link days. So that's not necessarily the case here. Local survivability and SBA, when we talk about Survivable Branch Appliance, is scoped very much to direct routing, because we depend on that SBC connectivity to use as the bypass for service outage. A couple of things that, when we talk to our customers about planning for resiliency, you've got the very much the requirements, right? So you've got to really kind of sit down, because I've got a lot of customers that will say, hey, I need survivability at this site, this site, this site. It's okay, maybe that head office doesn't have, they can maybe stand an outage. But it's important to kind of know those requirements from a voice level. Also, I think about this in, back to consulting days, right? How do you plan for this? You stand up at a whiteboard, right? You've got all your sites here, right? It's this site, this site, this site. Then what do? I draw the connectivity paths, right, for each site, and whether it goes straight to the internet or does it go to another site, I build those kind of lines in. And then you take a big red marker and you X out those lines, and you say, what happens when we lose this circuit? What do we have in place, or how would we fail over? Where would we go? So that's really kind of crucial when you sit and you plan for voice resiliency. So that's kind of how I think about it. The one thing I will say is that you cannot go wrong if you're using any cloud service, even if you're not using voice today. If you use any cloud service, your baseline connectivity method should be at least 2 different kinds of paths to the internet, right? Even more crucially, when it's voice. That should be a baseline configuration that you feel confident with. And I would say that applies just across the board for any service, right? Any cloud service that you're using. when you look at and then when you kind of look to map it, then you can see kind of baseline requirements here, and then you can see local survivability requirements. Now, local survivability requirements, these are kind of what you can get from it today. One thing to understand is we're more than likely not ever going to expand the SBA beyond voice, because voice is kind of is critical. I completely understand that, there are times for where chat is leveraged heavily in outage scenarios too. But our core focus right now with the SBA is really kind of making sure that we've got that voice resiliency aspect. And a lot of that has been, we needed to kind of build that functionality up. So again, Teams Phone, local survivability with direct routing. We've kind of called it out here, right? Local survivability in Teams is right now focused very much on voice, right? We're very, very focused on delivering call forwarding, all of the basic core voice capabilities into SBA before we even kind of consider, chat and anything like that. So what is the SBA for direct routing? Right. This is, again, one of the big things here that's super important, and something that we learned from talking to many customers. For instance, mining customers, excuse me, some mining customers that they're actually sitting in really remote areas, right? And they may not actually have an internet connection available that's independent of their PSTN. So in a lot of these scenarios, your remote, it could even be on like a mining platform in the middle of the ocean, right? Where you can have your internet experience isn't ideal. And that's where the SBAs become really important. Because when we looked at that failover scenario, what was most important for mining companies wasn't actually that they had PSTN and dial out capability, but more importantly, that they had internal capability. So that's actually structured a lot of our planning and how we're actually delivering solutions, right? The other important piece here has been where our capabilities have gone. So you'll notice here that we've gone and we've focused a lot on auto attendant and call queue. Because what our customers said was, in certain areas, we're using a call queue, we're using an auto attendant. And, if we lose connectivity to the service, now the calls into that auto attendant or that call queue agent just go nowhere, right? So we focused on call queue and auto attendant delivery. And we actually came up with two different specs. The spec that you'll see that's shipped now is actually a PSTN failover, right? But what we did notice, again, when we spoke to a lot more customers, was some customers were fine with a PSTN kind of failover. Others weren't, right? Because, again, they may not have an independent PSTN circuit. So we decided we would build both specs. So the spec that we've built out today is a failover via PSTN. So what that looks like is you would actually have an auto attendant or a call queue that has a spot where you can configure like a rollover or a failover resource account, or phone number. That would actually have to live outside of that direct routing configuration for that site, right? And there's a lot of challenges there, which we definitely highlighted, which also made it important to keep going with a local strategy. Because what happens in this scenario is a call comes into a call queue, it redirects out via PSTN back into the service, and it queues over there, right? At that point, you have the ability to configure that call to either come back into the site once it's ready. But if you do that, what happens? You take up two PSTN channels, right? You're double dipping there. So you're taking up 2 points of connectivity. Whereas if you route it out to another site, you're not. So a couple of the things that we heard from some large customers was we want the ability to fail over and have another site kind of handle that that capability. But the other piece was we need to actually build that in the local code on the SBA. So for those customers that don't have PSTN available, that calls into that queue can still redirect and kind of just leverage the internal VoIP capabilities within that site. So that's going to be the next level. So we're still building that code. But it will be coming out shortly. And yes, let's get to the Uber one that's been asked for and finally delivered is extended token support for up to 7 days. So the way this is going to work is essentially what we're doing. Let's take a step back. Let's go to client auth, right? So your team's client, you come in, you sign in, and what do? We request a Skype token from the service, right? When you're connected to the service, all things are good. That Skype token comes back and you're able to do your work. Well, what happens when you have an outage? Now, the next time you come in, potentially, you may not be able to get a new token. So what we've actually done here is we have kind of given the SBA the ability to accept an expired token for up to 7 days, right? So when your client now has a expired token, it's still going to go to the service, right? And it's going to come back and it's going to ask for a new token. You can't get to the service, right? Oh, you know what? Good call out there, Tony. This has been fast moving. So initially it was 72 hours. And then just as we got to Ignite, we realized we could do 7 days. So that's my fault. I still need to go back and update these slides. So nope, my apologies. It is 7 days. And thank you for the note because it reminds me to fix the slide. So where was I? We were talking about, so you're in an outage scenario. Let's say a new user or a user that hasn't been signed in comes in and you've just got SBA capabilities. That Teams client is still going to request a Skype token, a refreshed Skype token from the service, but that's going to fail. And now we've got the client logic to then take the expired token and request and register to the SBA. And the SBA will accept that expired token. So that's kind of how this, I have it in the coming soon because yes, we have pushed it out. We have made it available. But it still does take our SBC vendors some time to incorporate that code. So the the kind of expectation here is we've given all our SBC vendors the code for this new client that can request an expired token. They will be building it into their SBC capabilities, right? And then they will announce that they have it available. So I wanted to jump into capabilities there. But I also want to go back to one thing to remember is that the SBA, when we work very closely with our SBC vendors, but the SBA is really just an app, right, that we build that we then give to the SBC vendors, and then they employ it into they deploy it kind of within their SBC configurations. So it's very much a partnership. If you're looking as a customer, yes, we will speak to SBA, but we don't actually put out guidance about sizing or anything like that, right? Because we rely on the SBC vendors for that. They should be able, and they're talking to our customers about, hey, how do we size this? How do we make sure, we've got enough how do we know we've got enough ports? How do we know we've got enough for, this is our period of, this is the period of busy time, and how much we need at any given point in time. So we rely very heavily on our SBC vendors to give that guidance to our customers. So they do sizing. And then again, we work with them on capabilities that we write into the SBC app, right? And that's essentially kind of client code or server-side code that needs to be built. And then we hand that code to the SBC vendors to implement. Carlos, I see. Is there a technical reason why web and mobile clients cannot use the SBA token? So actually, one thing we have noticed is kind of almost unbeknownst to us, SBA mobile stopped working. We were expecting that it did. So actually, and this has happened recently, where we found out that we cannot actually, the mobile client, at least iOS, is not actually working in a failover scenario. So we're going back and we're looking at that again. In terms of the web client, I'll be honest, we have kind of prioritized like the native devices, so your desk phones, your team's native phones. And we've prioritized clients, of course, but desktop clients. And then our next one is going to be to fix and make sure that our mobile clients can work. I'm not aware of any technical reason why we couldn't support web just yet, but I do know our focus is more on the actual desktop and mobile clients. So I would have to kind of take that one away and see if there's a technical reason we couldn't support the web. What I will say is the web has that client has significantly changed with new teams. So my expectation is that we've probably got some work to do in the web space to make that work with SBA. But as far as I know, like I said, we're going to kind of prioritize the desktop apps and then mobile apps. So sorry, not apps, clients. So I hope that helps, Carlos. Good. Oh, that's a good question. SBA famous for bad performances in the chat. We've kind of talked about it. There have been conversations. where, and I'm just going to kind of move off this slide, but I do want to say that, yes, we have had conversations about what if we were to move to a model where SBA was just could function just on a where we didn't make it necessarily so dependent on the SBC vendor. So for instance, we could just provide the code out, and then customers could build VMs and actually put the code on. And there are some upsides to that, because for in that scenario, we technically could potentially, if you had a side PSTN or a backup PSTN connection, we technically could also have SBA work for calling plans and Operator Connect, and potentially even Teams Phone Mobile. What I will say is that right now, we're more focused on working on the bad performance issues with the SBC vendors that we have. So we have considered kind of bringing the SBC out and just having it be a fully fledged, just almost like I'm going to use the old word here, right? A workload or a role by itself. But, right now we're really kind of, again, more focused on let's expand the capabilities that we're making available to customers, and let's focus on the client capabilities and the clients that can connect to SBA. So we've kind of put that on the back burner, in basically just to kind of answer some of the much more asked for capabilities in the meantime. So prerequisites here. This again just kind of speaks to what I've covered, which is the SBA is a code. It's code that we give to the SBC vendors, which and the SBC vendors then go into the deployment specifics. Design considerations, just kind of questions to ask, or things to think about, right? If you don't have a separate internet connection from and PSTN connectivity, note that you might not be able to have, if you lose your internet, right, and lose connectivity to the service, you might only have VoIP capabilities if you're leveraging SBA, and VoIP internal. So that wouldn't necessarily, you need a dedicated PSTN for PSTN capabilities when you go into SBA or survivable mode. And then this really is just kind of a video that talks through how SBA works. So you can see green lines here where we've got, oh, sorry. I'm a Mac user and I'm using a Windows machine today, and the touchpad is not nice. So apologies. We were in the middle of that. So green, when you have connectivity. Red, when you don't. And you can see how the green line is now to your SBC and SBA and PSTN network. And then when you get it back. I have also just kind of put each step out here. So if you're using a PDF or actually the playbook and the video doesn't render, you have the kind of the steps there. And outside of that, that's pretty much it. Any questions or comments, feedback, anything like that? I'm reading your question now, Tony, but Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say Tony would be the only one that I saw that I don't think you've really addressed. So if you want to just look at that.
Sure. Separate it out. Okay. Not all SBCs include SBA support. Yeah, you're right. A lot of, so there's only specific vendors, right, that are certified for SBA. And oftentimes you have got to know that you're going to want SBA when you're getting those SBCs, right? So yeah. No, I definitely, I completely understand the need, and why having it as a standalone would be really, really good, right? Especially if you're in a mixed environment, right? Calling plans, this, that, the other thing, that would also be, it would be really helpful. You did have a different question above. What's the token refresh interval? Okay, so let's break that out a little bit. The token refresh interval um, is still 24 hours. So the client hasn't changed, right? We've kept the token refresh interval the same because we need to have it back, when you're back in, you're out of survivability mode and you're reconnected to the service, that interval is the same. So we haven't changed the token or the token flow. All we've done is we've allowed the client to accept and the SBA to approve a expired client when the service isn't accessible. So again, the client will still ask the SBA every day. But for up to 7 days, the SBA is going to go and say, okay, yeah, use this expired one, use this expired one. 7 days minus the time since the last refresh. Yeah, that's my understanding. I know we wanted to do it as a running 7 days from whenever a client connected, but that there was some significant security concerns with that. So yes, 7 days minus the time since the last refresh. And our partners, Ring Central, oh, no, not Ring Central, sorry, Ribbon, Audio Codes, and Oracle are the three that we support that I know of. If you've got the link, I think.
It also says TE systems in there as well.
Yes, that's the other one I keep forgetting.
Most of us do, yes. All right, any other questions? I think you got all of them.
All right.
Perfect.
Sorry, I hope I haven't put everybody to sleep on that stuff. It's a lot of heavy content sometimes, so
it is, yes.
But I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you guys, and absolutely happy to do some. Don, Jonathan, if there are any customers that want some special love, you know where to find me.
For sure.
So,
yes, thanks, Nolene.
Yeah, and make sure everybody, if that's the case, let us know in the survey that you're interested in more information about survivability and 959s and that, and integrating or connecting with the CAPE team, because I think that's a great opportunity to do it. So thank you again, Nolene. Appreciate your time and expertise today again.
Thank you.